Arknight's operators are divided into 8 different classes, each of which having its own niche in your team. And while it's fun to just talk about the strongest operators in the game, because of how different their kits can be, I think it makes the most sense to compare them within their classes. For each class, I'll be going over my pick for the best operator, and also leaving some basic information about their kit on the screen where you can pause to read if you need. At the end of the video, I'll also try to rank these operators from 1 to 8 just for fun. I'll go in order of how the classes are listed in the game, which begins with Vanguards. The best Vanguard in the game is Ines. I'll give an honorable mention to our standard bearers, who still consistently generate the most DP if that's all you care about. I'll also mention Mulesies, who I think is pretty underrated and has a high ceiling if you know what you're doing, and Bagpipe is also still pretty great. Going back to Ines though, she does basically everything you want in a Vanguard. She's an agent, which means she generates DP when attacking with skill. Her talents notably let her bind enemies on the first hit and slow enemies within range, and also provide some extra utility like revealing invisible enemies and stealing some attack from them. If you retreat her, she also leaves behind a sentry that lets her talent 2's effects linger even when she's off field, entirely without taking up a deployment slot. She also inherently has a faster deployment time and can hit air because of her archetype. Her S2 is really good, expanding her range and stealing attack speed from enemies, and also allowing her to generate a DP every time she hits an enemy. Since she constantly gains attack speed during this skill, she'll hit more and more enemies, which generates a lot of DP. You can reasonably replace a standard bearer on your team with Ines and not feel too big of a difference in DP gen. She just does so much more than other Vanguards while not really sacrificing anything important in her kit. Guards are interesting because there are just so many good options. Even in the end, it was kind of tough for me to pick a number 1, and I was debating between Dagonbreaker and Moinar the whole time. I decided to go with Dagon, though I wouldn't really blame you if you picked Moinar. I'll also give an honorable mention to Surtur, who's still really strong, Alpianus, who is especially great in Abyssal Hunter teams. I also think Zwilla is pretty underrated, and I promise I'm not just saying that because I pulled him 7 times. Dagon is a Swordmaster guard with an auto recovery S3 for some reason. She's block 2 and does solid damage outside of her skill, compared to Moinar who just reads his newspaper and does nothing until you use the skill. While Moinar does more damage per skill, in a more convenient range, it charges slower. It also lasts way longer though compared to Dagon's S3, which is a quick burst. These skills are both broken tier and have their pros and cons, but outside of this comparison, I like Dagon's utility as a lane holder. It makes her better for general content while still being great for difficult stages. I do want to mention though, that Moinar being block 0 means he usually doesn't randomly get 2-shot by strong enemies, which can be important in some stages. But overall, I'd say Dagon is slightly better and is my pick for the strongest guard. Comparisons aside though, just use both. My pick for the best defender is definitely Shu. I'll give an honorable mention to Horn, who is the best damage dealing defender, as well as Mudrock and Penance, who are just tanks, but overall Shu has some irreplaceable utility that makes her far better than the other options. At least for the moment. Shu is a Guardian defender, and the healing she provides makes her feel super comfy to use, and combined with the extra utility in her kit, makes her one of, if not the best defensive operators in the game. Her S3 is a strong healing skill with a big range, and with her talent, it also plants rice fields under and around the operators she heals. These tiles give operators standing on them a good amount of constant healing, alongside physical and arts damage reduction. The tiles are also able to heal unhealables like Link Dragons, Wishadel turrets, and operators of certain archetypes like Zwilla or Mudrock for example. On top of all that defensive utility, during her entire S3 duration, any enemies that stand on a rice field will be teleported back to that tile if they try to walk away. This is really good for stalling bosses that are stun immune, and also means that you basically can't leak anything during her entire skill duration. I'll also quickly mention that if you have 4 Sway siblings on your team, all your operator skills will charge faster thanks to her Sway talent. Just a completely loaded kit that gives you much more than other defenders do. There isn't much of a conversation to be had for snipers. I'll mention Ray and Typhon as other great snipers, and Shelter and Narantuya are still pretty good as well, though I don't think they're close in power to Wishadel at all. Being a flinger sniper, Wishadel does massive physical AoE damage, and the range on her shots for her S3 really redefine what AoE means. They delete everything they hit, and also hit basically everything on the map. These S3 shots also hit air for literally no reason, making it so that Wishadelle basically has no downsides or weaknesses. Even when her skill isn't active, she does good damage with her normal attacks, and also has her turrets that slow enemies. These turrets do solid damage as well, and she has built-in camouflage near her turrets, making it really hard for enemies to hit her. If she's ever not the best sniper in the game, it might be over. Casters have historically been the weakest class in Arknights, but that's changed recently. In my opinion, the strongest caster in the game is Logos, and I'll shout out the recently released Lapland de Cadenza and Nymph as well. Logos is just a Giga Chad that does way too much for a core caster. At a baseline, he's just a solid caster, probably being at a slightly higher power level to the older casters in the game, but his module literally changes everything. It enables him to deal elemental damage, while massively buffing his first talent. With this module, Logos can proc Necrosis Burst by himself, and because of how elemental damage works, it's basically a big amount of added true damage on top of his already solid base kit. His first talent initially allows him to deal an additional 60% of his attack as arts damage 40% of the time he hits an enemy, but the module buffs this to 60% of the time and also adds another 60% attack as elemental damage on top of that. So basically, he does a lot of damage. He also has some utility like slow and other debuffs like minus 10 res and making enemies take increased arts damage on his second talent. His S1 is also a really good AFK skill and makes enemies demonetize themselves. Logos is just a broken operator and combines many caster archetypes into one with little trade-offs. Medic is kind of a weird class. I think the best medic is Ea Alter, but the options behind her that I'll shout out, being Reed Alter and then Kal'tsit, are more like DPS characters than medics. Nightingale is also still great and fills some useful niches. Ea does what you'd think a medic would do, and really well. Being a wandering medic, she has a massive range and recovers elemental injury from allies. The range makes her comfy to use as a general healer, and both her S1 and S3 amplify this. S1 is a strong AFK healing skill, while S3 gives her global range across the whole map. Her talents also let her trivialize incoming elemental damage, which isn't useful in every stage, but when it comes up, she can hard carry some stages. Even ignoring that though, I find myself picking her the most when I just need a medic, solely because of the comfort aspect. In terms of medics overall though, she has the most utility and also some game-breaking potential, which makes her the strongest in my opinion. The last two classes are interesting because they have a large range of what the operators do. For supporters, my pick is Virtuosa. While I do still think an operator like Ling is more broken just because of how her kit works, I think Virtuosa is better overall. I'll also mention Sculptor, who's still one of the best buffers in the game, and Suzerain is still a pretty solid debuffer. Yeah, these four operators do completely different things, so instead of just trying to hard compare them, I'm gonna yap about why I think Arturia is a really strong operator. She's a ritualist supporter, meaning she specializes in dealing arts damage and inflicting elemental injury. Her talent makes all enemies within range take 33% more necrosis damage with a max module, which lets her be paired really well with operators like Nymph and Logos. She can max out the necrosis meter and trigger the burst really fast on her own though. With her module, elites and bosses take 18% more elemental injury, and she also inflicts 5% elemental fragility to enemies after a necrosis burst happens, which just further amplifies elemental damage. Her S3 is great at clearing out big waves of enemies thanks to its massive range, and because it amplifies her necrosis damage by 2.5 times. It also provides extra utility like a bigger slow and buffs some of your allies in range. Since elemental damage operators are somewhat new and unexplored still, she also has the potential to become a lot better in the future. What I look for in a specialist is to fill a niche that other classes can't. That's why I think the Executor Texas Alter is the best specialist. That being said though, I have to mention the two other broken specialists in the game, Yado Alter and Ela. Yado is an alternative fast redeploy option to Texas, and I'll compare them a bit more later. Ela is a very strong operator, doing high damage and providing good debuffs. I just find that she has more alternatives you can use, while fast redeploys are hard to replace. I should also mention, while not quite on the same level as the other three, Ascalon is also really good. Texas is a versatile specialist, providing either high single target damage or AoE and stun on a short redeployment time, depending on your skill of choice. You could also use her S1 silence in niche stages, I guess, S2 though makes her a boss killer with a panic button option, while S3 makes her a well-rounded damage dealer and the ultimate panic button. This skill lets you stun any enemies, including ones in the air that are about to leak. Of course you could just use it to stun and deal a lot of damage to regular enemies as well, but in these situations, if the skill somehow hasn't dealt with them, it at least buys you a good amount of time. On the other hand, Yado also has a single target S2 and an AoE S3 on a faster burst, but with worse range on both. Her module does make her cost less DP though, which can be important in some harder stages. In general, with a stun and better range, I find Texas more useful overall, but again, you can just use both. After all, you need both a cherry bomb and a jalapeno to kill a Gargantuar. Finally, here are my overall rankings for these operators. Not going to talk too much about this since, again, this part's just for fun, and seriously trying to compare these operators with each other across classes kind of defeats the point of the video. But still, power rankings are fun, and you can put your list in the comments if you disagree. And that's all. Of course, I'm still pretty new to making this style of video, so feedback is always appreciated. If you liked the video though, consider subscribing.